We see the headlines about massive lawsuits and market monopolies, but we rarely see the actual mechanics of how they're being fought. This is EconWorks. We look past the talking points to find where law, economics, and markets actually collide. Let's get into it.
All right, let's talk about antitrust. Specifically, this massive question that keeps popping up. Have states gotten so powerful that they're basically on the same level as the federal government when it comes to fighting monopolies? Well, the huge fight over Ticketmaster gives us a perfect way to really figure this out. So, let's get into it.
Look, we've all seen the Ticketmaster headlines, right? It feels like this classic David versus Goliath showdown. You've got government regulators on one end of the rope, this corporate giant on the other. But if you look a little closer, you start to see there are a whole lot of hands on that rope. And it makes you wonder, who's really in charge here?
So there's this story, this popular idea that's really taken hold. It's the idea that state attorneys general have become this parallel force, just as powerful as the Department of Justice, or DOJ. And honestly, when you look at the surface, it's a pretty convincing argument. But is it the whole story? To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at the Ticketmaster case. I mean, it is the perfect stress test. You've got a huge national company whose business has a very real, very local impact on every single one of us. In a clash that big, it naturally pulls in both layers of government enforcement. And this is where things get really interesting. The Department of Justice actually settled its case with Ticketmaster. Normally, you'd think, okay, case closed. But nope. A coalition of more than 30 states looked at that federal deal and said, no thanks. They rejected it and kept their own lawsuit going. And that one move, right there, is probably the biggest reason for this whole states are equals idea. So, okay, let's lean into that argument for a second. Why does it feel like the states are the new sheriffs in town? Well, because they aren't just tagging along in these fights anymore. They are serious players with a pretty intimidating legal arsenal of their own. I mean, think about the tools they have. A state attorney general can sue a company using the exact same federal antitrust laws as the DOJ. Plus, they can use their own state laws too. And they can ask for huge, huge remedies. We're talking even asking a court to break up a company. And as we just saw, they can keep that fight going long after the feds have decided to call it a day. And that's really where the perception comes from. You know, when dozens of states team up, they really do start to look and act like a second, parallel national regulator. They can bring an incredible amount of resources and political heat down on one company. But, and this is a big but, this is where the story gets a lot more complicated. Because, you see, there's a really big difference between being able to apply pressure and actually being able to force a final resolution. And it's in that gap that you find the real limits of what the states can do. Which brings us to the big question, the one that really matters. With all that power, can this big coalition of states actually achieve the ultimate prize in antitrust, a full-on structural breakup of a company like Ticketmaster, all by themselves? Well, the answer is it's not quite that simple. There are some major hurdles. First off, states can only ask a court to break up a company. They can't just order it. Second, for a national company, that case has to be heard in a federal court. And finally, this is the big one, a federal judge has to be convinced that a nationwide breakup is the right call, not just something for the states that are suing. So what this all means in the real world is that states don't really break up giant companies on their own. Their true power, their superpower, is something a little different. It's their ability to create so much legal, political, and public pressure that a breakup goes from being unthinkable to being a very real possibility. And that leads us to a much, much better way to think about this whole power structure. Instead of seeing states and the feds as equals, we should really see the states as what you'd call force multipliers. So what is a force multiplier? It's pretty simple, actually. It's something that, when you add it into the mix, doesn't replace the original force, but instead makes it way, way more powerful and effective. And that, right there, is the perfect way to describe what states do in antitrust now. And you can see how this works right here. The feds, the DOJ and the FTC, they bring that centralized power. They can deliver a single, clear, nationwide result. The states, though, they're decentralized, they're often more aggressive, and they work together in these big coalitions to just ratchet up the pressure. So you see, the states aren't replacing federal power, not at all. What they're doing is shaping the entire battlefield. By keeping these cases going and by demanding tougher outcomes, they're fundamentally changing the calculation for everyone involved, and they're forcing the federal government's hand. And you might be asking, okay, so what? Why does this matter? Well, it matters a whole lot. Because figuring out who actually has the final say is everything when it comes to understanding how corporate power is or isn't kept in check. Remember that simple tug of war we started with? The truth is, it's much more like a messy, complex, high-stakes negotiation with a ton of different players at the table. The states might not be able to win that tug of war on their own, but they can absolutely stop the federal government from just letting go of the rope. And that, right there, is the real takeaway. States might not be a parallel equal enforcement agency, but make no mistake, they are absolutely powerful enough to completely change the final outcome of a national case. They can turn what might have been a simple settlement into an all-out war for a company's future. Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to chew on. Having the power to reshape the entire fight and force a completely different ending. Is that just leverage? Or is that maybe a new kind of parody after all?
Thanks for watching. For the deep dive economic analysis behind these stories, join us at econworks.com. Subscribe to stay informed on where law and economics meet the market. We'll see you in the next episode.